Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. Joyful all ye nations rise, join the triumph of the skies. With angelic hosts proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King.
And welcome to His Generation podcast. This is a special day today. Today is the day that we celebrate our Lord Jesus' birth. And this birth is a special birth. It's not just this random historical figure, but there's so much more to this birth. And we are a blessed people that we have God's revealed word. And in God's revealed word, we have different accounts of this blessing of a birth. And one thing I wanted to do today for His Generation podcast is I wanted to create a special episode. What I have for you guys today is not only some great music with the Aaron Elizabeth Lambath Band. They have a Christmas album out called Jesus Best Gift Ever, and you can get that and download that on Apple or Spotify. And they're personal friends of mine, and so I thought I'd use their intro this morning, and I'm going to maybe play some music on the out of the podcast today. So that's something special for you. But also, too, I thought we would look at one of the 4 different narratives that we have of the birth of Christ, which is in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, Matthew's Gospel is a little bit different than the other Gospel accounts, where we have a little bit more details related to the prophecies of the birth of the Christ. And I wanted to point that out this morning because sometimes when we read the narrative accounts of Jesus, we have in our Western culture, we have a lot of movies, a lot of different illustrations, church sermons, maybe even we read some books that are related to the birth of Christ. And so within that, we lose a lot of the historical timeline. And in theology, we would call it the redemptive timeline. We lose a lot of that redemptive timeline when we go into just the very modern version, summary, maybe we can call it that, of the birth of Christ. Most of us in Western culture, when we think of the birth of Christ, we think of the nativity scene. And in the nativity scene, we usually see different animals there because Jesus was born in a manger. We see baby Jesus, we see Joseph, we see Mary, we see the shepherds, and we see the wise men. And that's pretty much all we see in this. And we really don't know a lot of the stories surrounding it other than that there's a star that led the shepherds and led the wise men to see Jesus. The wise men brought some gifts. Possibly they're from somewhere outside of Israel, maybe coming somewhere from the east. So there's just not a lot that's there that we understand about the narrative, or let's say the birth of Jesus Christ and how spectacular of a fulfillment it was. Except when you get into Matthew's gospel, because once you get into Matthew's gospel, you understand this huge timeline, this redemptive timeline that we do see the birth of Christ coming out of. And so I'm going to read from Matthew's gospel today, and I'm not going to do too much dissection and unpacking of it, but I want to at least look at some of the prophecies from the Old Testament prophets that Matthew decides to use when he wants to identify the uniqueness, the fulfillment of Christ's birth. And so we're going to look at that a little bit today. So thank you for joining today. This is Saturday, and this is a live broadcast. And I'm very blessed that I'm able to do this with the crowd today. I have a little bit of time to get away from family and do this podcast, and then I will go back and celebrate Christmas with my family. For you that are listening to this audibly, you are listening to it Sunday morning, the day after Christmas, and I hope you are blessed, and I hope you're having a blessing with family and church that day. A shout out to my church that I go to, Branches in Fullerton. Just wanted to I was thinking about you guys when I thought about coming in the studio and talking a little bit about Matthew's gospel. And I hope you guys are blessed by not only this teaching, but also blessed by some of the music that I've attached to the beginning and the end of this podcast. So here we go. The gospel according to Matthew. This is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David and son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob. And Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. And Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron. And Hezron begot Ram. And Ram begot Amminadab. And Amminadab begot Nashim. And Nashom begot Solom. And Solom begot Boaz by Rahab. And Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. And Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begat David the king. And so we have the generations from Abraham to David. That's very important when we start to look at who Christ is and his genealogy, because Christ came from Abraham. Abraham was promised that a great nation would come out of Abraham, but also with that great nation, God disguised the prophecy of saying, in your seed, singular. So that's interesting. So it's a very, very hidden prophecy, but not to be revealed until later on when Christ comes on the scene. And then when it comes all the way down and it bottlenecks down to David, David is clearly seen at that point in the scriptures as the furtherance of the fulfillment of Christ to come, because David was given what's called the Davidic covenant. And in the Davidic covenant, one was going to come to rule over Israel, and it was going to be an everlasting throne. So right now, right at that point, we start to see the divinity of this promised one and how it's bottlenecking down to David. And so it's important that those two guys are like signposts when it comes to the genealogy of Christ. So Abraham to David, and then it goes on there to David, and we have many descendants of David here that's going to lead all the way up to Babylon, and that's going to be important. So let's see. David the king begot Solomon by her who had the wife of Uriah. Solomon begot Rehoboam, and Rehoboam begot Abijah, and Abijah begot Asa, and Asa begot Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat begot Joram, and Joram begot Uzziah, and Uzziah begot Jotham, and Jotham begot Ahaz, and Ahaz begot Hezekiah, and Hezekiah begot Manasseh, Manasseh begot Ammon, and Ammon begot Josiah. And Josiah begat Jeconiah and his brothers about the time they were carried away to Babylon. Now, that's important to remember, because by the time the nation of Israel, after Solomon's time, they split up. You have a northern and you have a southern. And then within that time, you have many prophets that rise up, like Isaiah or Jeremiah, or even Micah and Hosea and all these other prophets that are around that time frame. And what's interesting in that time frame, that little section right there, the prophecies that these guys gave of the Messiah were prophecies that point specifically to his miraculous birth. And you need to remember that, and that's what the author is doing here. It's pointing that thing out there, because that was right before they were conquered, northern by the Assyrians, and then, of course, the southern eventually by the Babylonians or the Chaldeans. And so that is a very important timeline in the history of the nation of Israel, and also, too, the redemptive history to when Christ, the Messiah, was to be born, or was going to come out of that eventually. Because then we got into the second part here, which is the time of captivity. It says there in verse 12, and after they were brought to Babylon, Jeconiah begat Shealtiel, and Shealtiel begat Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel begat Abidab, and Abidab begat Eliakim, and Eliakim begat Azar, and Azar begat Zadok, and Zadok begat Achin, and Achin begat Eliud, and Eliud begot Eleazar, and Eleazar begot Mathan, and Mathan begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is the Christ. And so from the time that they came back from Babylon, brought back into the land of Israel, the generations continued. Although we don't see a kingly descendants that are in charge at this point, we do see the lineage of that kingly descendants, and specifically the tribe of Judah, continued on to where Joseph, the husband of Mary, is of Judah. Thus, Christ, or Jesus, his son, is going to be the Messiah, and thus fulfilling what? The Davidic covenant, that this was going to be a descendant of David. And that's why it says at the very beginning of the first verse there, the son of David and the son of Abraham. So you see the connection. So this is a very Hebrew book, if we can say it that way, because it's fulfilling these prophetic signposts, these prophetic attributes that we do see of Christ. And that's what the author's trying to assemble here for his reader, to show how Christ is a fulfillment of all of the messianic prophecies that were wrapped up in the nation of Israel through their prophets as God revealed it to them. And now we see here in verse 18 where it says this. It says, "Now the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. After his mother, Mary, was betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit. And then Joseph, her husband, being a just man, and not wanting to make her a public example, was minded to put her away secretly. But while he thought about these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David," so that's important. So the son of David is, again, bringing it back to understanding that Joseph is specifically of the lineage of David, and thus Jesus is going to be a fulfillment of that Davidic covenant. "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take to you Mary, your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. And she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. So all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which is translated God with us." A very important prophecy in Isaiah. In fact, it's in Isaiah chapter 7. So we see there that the angel of the Lord came to Joseph in a dream, because Joseph was kind of at a crux. He was at a very social, cultural crux, where this woman who he was betrothed to, in other words, they were destined to be married, and it's like modern day engagement. But more than that, there was no breaking this engagement off. It was a commitment. It just, they haven't consummated the marriage yet. So she comes to him and says, I have a child, right? It doesn't say that in the text here, but in other things you do see it. But he was at a place where he was like, well, I haven't laid with her. I haven't conceived with her. So where's this child come from? Of course, socially, culturally, you can see the dilemma there, obviously, without going into details. But fortunately, in God's providence, he came to Joseph in a dream. And that's the way that God decided to speak to Joseph, because you'll see here and a couple more times that he is going to come to Joseph again in a dream to give direction of what to do as far as the birth and protecting Jesus while he was in the infant stage and child stage. And so you're going to see this again. So the dream is brought up a couple more times, that's the way that God communicates to Joseph when it comes to all these things. But here's where we see the first inserting of the prophecies that we see that are going to be applied to Jesus' birth. And this one is the virgin birth prophecy. And now you might look at that and go, wow, that is quite a prophecy. It's quite a wonderful prophecy, because it's miraculous. I mean, a virgin to have child with her, it's unheard of. And of course, it makes sense because we have something that's very holy here. This is the eternal Son manifesting in the flesh. And so there's going to be a special attribute that's going to come along with that, and that's the virgin birth. And so here's the first prophet that Matthew inserts, and it happens to be Isaiah the prophet. And that's important because what you're going to see with all these prophecies that are given within this just chapter 1, chapter 2 text, they're all going to be related to that specific time that's sandwiched in between Abraham to David, and then from David to Babylon, and Babylon to their current present state here in Matthew's gospel. So that portion between David and Babylon, all these prophecies are going to come. It's interesting because that was probably when Israel suffered the most turmoil. So in the midst of about to be invaded from Syria in the north, and then about to be invaded from Babylon in the south, and all due to their disobedience and their leadership's disobedience, the prophets, whether it's Hosea, Micah, and Jeremiah, or Isaiah, and those are the 4 ones that I believe he uses here in this portion of text that we're going through, they all give hint and pieces of the puzzle to the revelation of Jesus Christ. In the midst of that, in the midst of God's judgment, in the midst of Israel's disobedience, and in the midst of this great turmoil of the nation itself, both socially and regionally. And then I'll even say this, in the midst of, at the end of their regional reign, the temple being destroyed, these prophecies are given. So you need to keep that in mind because it's very important, especially if you're one of Jewish culture, you understand that those things are important fulfillments and important times. And we get into chapter 2, and it says there, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And so they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus is it written by the prophet." And here's the second insertion of the prophet. And this one, in this case, is going to be Micah. And you can find this prophecy in Micah chapter 5, I believe. And it says there, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a ruler," capital R, "who will shepherd my people Israel." And so Micah there, again, Micah's one of the contemporaries of Isaiah. And so he was there prophesying in a very active time of them about to be taken over by Assyria. And so that prophecy was given to Micah the prophet about Christ to come. And so the chief of priests and the scribes and all those that were religious rulers and religious scholars at the time, when Herod summoned them because of these wise men, some call them kings, out of the east, they come seeking the Christ because they understand some of the scriptures too. Some scholars would say also too, these were men who come out of the Chaldean region who had some leftover influences of Daniel the prophet, who was one of their main scholars there at the time of the ruling of Babylon and the Chaldeans after them. So some scholars say that that's probably where they got their influence and where they understood scriptures and they understood this Messiah to come. Who knows? But the point of the story is this, that they did come out of the east. They were looking for the Christ. And if we're going to put it into a timeline, this is post the birth of Christ. And so I know we although we don't see a day by day of what's going on there in the other gospels, we can see some of the early days of Christ being born. But in this case, this is post Christ being born. And it could be anywhere up to maybe a year. So Christ could be already a year old at this point. We don't know. What we do know is that Joseph and Mary are still there in the Judean region, specifically in Bethlehem. And that's what we do know. And so not only do we know that from the text, but also too, from the prophecies, they understood that's where the Christ was to be born. And so Herod is inquiring, but here's the thing that we're going to see in the text. It's not here yet, but as we get down, Herod is inquiring because he is threatened from the power that might be taken away from him as king. because his kingship isn't one of popular. He's not king by popular demand. He's definitely not king by his nationality, because he's only what you would call someone that's not even full Jewish. You know, he comes more of, I think, the Edomite lineage, which is partly Jew, but he's not full Jewish. And he was someone that was actually allowed and set up as king from the Roman Empire, who really ruled at this time. So, of course, there's going to be politics involved, and there's going to be a power struggle involved. And so Herod is inquiring not for the sake of saying, hey, this is great. I've heard of the Messiah. In fact, part of my heritage is wrapped up in the Messiah. And so I want to learn who the Messiah is. Bring him to me. That's not what's going on there. And of course, we see that because the angel will reveal that to these wise men. And it says here, then Herod, verse 7, when he secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go, search out carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring him back to me, that I may come and worship him also. And when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with his mother Mary, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed from their own country another way. So again, this is what's called in a story the buildup, right? Herod talks to them, pulls them aside. Oh, in Bethlehem, go search it out. When you find that child, bring him to me so I can worship him. In other words, he's deceiving these wise men. But like all wise men, it's not wisdom of their own, but it's divine wisdom. And within that divine wisdom and provision, God reveals to them, just like I would say, I can assume, it doesn't say there in the text, but God reveals to them the star and the information of what that star represented to find the Messiah. But God also revealed to them, don't go back to Herod. And they did not go back to Herod. And it says there in verse 13, now, when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. And so this is where we reveal what's Herod's true intention. He wants to destroy the child. And of course, Joseph, the father of Jesus, is given in a dream information to go to Egypt. And so when he arose, that's Joseph, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, out of Egypt I've called my son. And that's a prophecy that comes to us from Hosea chapter 11. And what's interesting, in Hosea chapter 11, it's really not a very explicit messianic prophecy, but of course the apostle Matthew is here revealing to us that's what it meant. This prophecy was to be fulfilled of the Messiah when and after he was born. He was to go to Egypt, and then after those who sought to destroy his life, i.e. Herod, he was to flee out of there. And so it's interesting. And there's a lot to unpack in there with the Old Testament biblical allusions of, God setting his people free from Egypt out of the hand of Pharaoh, things like that. It all goes back to pointing to the person and work of Christ. But that's a whole other story, and that's a whole other teaching that we can do another time. But the story continues on there in verse 16. It says, then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, and that's what you would call a double entendre, right? So although he was deceiving the wise men deceived him. And so it says there, he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry, And he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all its districts, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he determined from the wise men. Then was fulfilled which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. And again, another obscure passage in the Old Testament of Jeremiah. And of course, Jeremiah in that time frame was speaking this because there was going to be great tragedy in the land of Judah, right? That would be associated to the children of Israel. And of course, you can always associate that to Rachel's children, which was one of the wives of Jacob. And there was great lamentation. There was great mourning. And that really was very applicable to Jeremiah's time as the Babylonians came in and they took Jerusalem captured and the land of Judah captured. But nevertheless, there was a double meaning to this prophecy, and it was also to reflect to the time of Herod, when Herod would also cause great death and destruction within that land of Bethlehem, those regions that are surrounding, Jerusalem, the outer regions and stuff like that. And this is the part of the story that we don't often share about, quote unquote, the Christmas story, do we? But we understand, according to this passage here, that Herod at the time had a lot of children killed because he wanted to destroy the Messiah. And he understood the Messiah was maybe about 1 year old at the time. So to be safe, 2 years and under, destroy them all in that area. And that's what his, soldiers went out and did. I mean, it's great tragedy. That happened. And we don't often think about that. But again, here's a reflection. Here's a reflection of the depravity of man. And especially when it comes to the depravity of man being so closely confronted by the righteousness of God revealed in his Son, Jesus Christ. So saints, take this as some wisdom. Speaking of the wise men, let's be wise men and wise women ourselves and take this as some wisdom to understand the depravity of man when they are confronted with the truthfulness, the light of Christ, the eternal Son of God. See, we have to understand that, because this happens in culture and society and nation again and again and again and again and again and again until Christ comes back. So kind of lock that information in your mind, because that's something you need to understand. Let's continue reading and we'll wrap it up in here in verse 19 of chapter 2 of Matthew. Now when Herod was dead, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the young child's life are dead. So it's interesting. Herod, who sought to destroy and did some great damage and some great just death of young innocent life, he himself died eventually, probably soon, like within a couple of years of this, of Christ fleeing down to Egypt. So he got what was coming to him. It's interesting to see that, how man wants to rise up against God, but God always has the final say, for he is the judge of the living and the dead. Then he arose, took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he had heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside to the region of Galilee, which is further up north. And that's where we see the beginning ministry of Christ happen. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall become a Nazarene. And of course, this is another prophecy that scholars attribute to Isaiah, because the word Nazarene, when you interpret it into Hebrew, especially in the Old Testament in Isaiah, he talks about this idea of the branch, right? And that's a very messianic term that's attributed to like another name attributed to Christ, the branch. And the branch, I guess, in Hebrew can be translated Nazarene. I'm not a Hebrew scholar by any means, but that's what I hear as I read different commentaries and different things on that. But again, it's this idea of the prophets that happened, that were right there in that time, whether it was Micah, Hosea, Jeremiah, or Isaiah. It's all within that time frame of Jerusalem going through a lot of turmoil post Solomon, the son of David, King Solomon. And when he passed away, his kingdom split up to north and south, the division. And then that division, of course, led into the ultimate fall of the nation of Israel within that time frame. We have the northern taken by Assyria at some point, and the southern taken by the Chaldeans or Babylon. And then that within that time frame of turmoil, we have all of these prophecies that Matthew decides to pull up to reveal about this miraculous birth of Christ. And so this morning I wanted to share that with you guys. I wanted to share the miraculous birth of Christ, or maybe a little bit of a different angle with the Herod information. I know we always don't talk about that situation, but now you know. If you haven't heard about it before, now you know, and I encourage you to do your own reading. But this is a very special day. And something different I wanted to do as we end this special day is I wanted to play out some music in regards to our Christmas celebrations. And so this is some friends of mine, Aaron Elizabeth Lambeth Band. I really enjoy their music, and this is a CD that they have out right now if you want to go on Apple or Spotify, and it's called Jesus Best Gift Ever. And you guys can go there and download this. I think it's for free. I don't think they charge anything. They're all about the ministry, and so that's what they do. They just put out this music for the purpose of ministry and blessing God's people. And so I want to bless you guys this morning, and we'll play Aaron Elizabeth Lambeth Band. Here we go. This is His Generation Podcast. Wishing you a Merry Christmas.
Holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Long may the world in sin and error pining till He appear and the soul felt its worth. The thrill of hope, a weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Call on your name, oh, hear the angel voices, oh, night divine, oh, night when Christ was born. Oh, night divine, oh, night divine. Truly He taught us to love one another. His law is love, and His gospel is peace. Chains shall He break, for the Savior's our brother, and in His name all oppression shall cease. Sweet